Peter, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, well, let's go. Look, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, right? Much less the Spanish flu. And for those of you that have been around long enough to remember Monty Python, what we're seeing right now must seem even more strange and surreal than what some of the stuff was that they cooked up in the day. But it's worth remembering that in every crisis, there is opportunity. I mean, this is an idea that predates the Chinese languages themselves. Of course, it was popularized by Sun Tzu in his Art of War in the 5th century, and it definitely predates John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Marilyn Monroe, all of whom made great currency out of it in the 60s. And it's an idea that's worth surfacing now, but it's difficult for me to do that without this sounding like some sort of platitude, something I've just dredged up for this webinar. For these ideas to be useful, they've got to become part of who you are. And that only comes a lot of the time through lived experience. Like, for example, when I was at university, I found that I didn't need to be the smartest kid to top my class. All I had to do was wait until everybody else froze or panicked and work twice as hard. And I had a completely unfair advantage. I'd gone to uni as a mature age student. I'd already been out in the world. I'd seen that the sun also rises. When you've been homeless, penniless and jobless, sometimes all at the same time, like we all were in our so-called OE that I'm still on 35 years later, then all the things that the students were worried about at the time seemed completely not worth worrying about to me. And the same thing happened when I went out and got a job. I got a job with a very famous Auckland-based company that you all know very well. And during the course of the summer, he managed to sack or drive out pretty much the whole sales and marketing team. Now, again, I had a completely unfair advantage in that I was working a university internship and he knew he was going to get rid of me anyway. He would have sacked me on the spot if he'd have seen some of my efforts at sign writing. But I found that by simply turning up and doing what needed to be done, I was able to progress from, you know, being a very junior merchandiser to managing national accounts almost seamlessly. And I've always carried that with me, and I've often discussed it with my wife, who's inspiring me greatly recently. She's a direct report to the CEO of a $22 billion a year health initiative here in Australia. And she was having a review with a functional manager because, you know, the CEO is not going to do that. And he said, look, I don't know if there's a place in our organization for you anymore. You know, we needed free-ranging creative problem solvers when this was kicking off, but, you know, we're now mature and we're more focused on operations. Well, that was a week ago. And, you know, she was very upset about that for about half an hour. And then she realized that what was needed was a kind of a dating app. She realized that there were 400,000 people that were in the most at-risk group, in that, you know, some of them were quadriplegics on ventilators already. And she thought, well, what happens? So we need an application that shows people where there is excess capacity and where capacity is needed. And she floated this idea past a fairly junior IT person. He then punted it up to the chief technology officer. He realized that they had a database that they were going to use for something else. They then repurposed it, put an app on the front of it, and 2 days later it was the thing. She also realized that most of their workforce was going home and there was no overarching plan for how to manage that. So she did that as well. And in the space of a week, she was leading 2 of the 5 most important projects in that business. And this is exactly what McKinsey is saying you need to be doing now, because it's not really fair to call this thing a crisis, because if it was a flood or a fire, or dare I even say it, an earthquake, there's a playbook for that. The guy who was the best man at my wedding is an engineer from Christchurch, and he got a phone call from Newcastle after the earthquake there. And he said to them, look, have you got some aftershock measuring equipment in place? And they said, aftershock measuring equipment? So, you know, there was a lot of work for a lot of Kiwis for a long time after that. But you're dealing with a situation right now that is completely novel, you know, where you're working with very little information. And the only consulting assignment I've had in New Zealand that went south was one where the owners had brought religion on this idea of self-managed teams. And that might work for the Brazilian auto industry or wherever they got the idea from. But, you know, it's completely unfair and unrealistic to expect that a winemaker, a viticulturist, you know, line managers in a medium-sized New Zealand wine business are going to be able to cook up a long-term strategy because they don't have the consumer insight or the market understanding. But in this situation, those guys are right. This is what you need. You need to get people in your business to be prepared to cross the line, to speak up, to make friends of people that they weren't friends with last week, you know, to get accounting, talking to production, to sales and marketing, and everybody coming up with solutions quickly. And the first question to ask is, you know, has our business got the sniffles or respiratory failure? And I mean, right at the moment, I've got no idea when I'm talking to businesses, you know, how they're actually going. So, you know, you've got to ask that question of yourself. I walked into my favorite deli the other day, and Angelo there's got a grin from ear to ear as he watches some otherwise sane looking person walk out with $400 worth of pasta. He says, here comes my yacht, versus I phoned a distributor friend of mine, and I said to him, look, you're not buying my on-premise research this year, but your competitors are, just sort of joking around. And 10 minutes later, he sends me an email and he says, well, look, I'm not going to stand down or lay off or temporarily suspend 80% of my workforce. I'm going to have to retrench them. You know, my business was already in a lot of trouble. So, you know, how serious is this crisis? Now, just like the Air New Zealand videos, the most important thing is to take care of yourself first. And if you've suddenly got a family member who's sitting home on the couch, then get them onto your bank statements. Look at all your forward expenditure. Look at all your subscriptions, your insurances, anything that you've got coming up that you don't have to spend money on. We've just completely restructured our finances. You know, I thought that the bank would be overrun. He said, well, actually, we're here to, you know, take care of house purchases and related. And he said, well, you know, we've not got much going on at the moment. So, you know, that was a pleasant surprise. And right now, the classics are really important. You know, stay calm, be clear about what the problem is and focus on the crisis. Now, this last one, I don't like, control the controllables, because it has become a bit of a cliche. And it's not until you're really clear that the only thing that matters for any of us is what's going through our mind at the moment and the decisions that we're making. We're all just the sum of our decisions, good, bad, or no decision. And it's only when you really get that emotions like fear, worry, regret all seem kind of pointless. And everybody's got their own pathway to get there. I must say that mine's more SAS and Richie McCaw inspired than hipster mindfulness guru. But, you know, they're all basically saying the same thing, you know, stay clear. And I was lucky enough to run the Turnaround Management Education program for the TMA Australia, which is a network of all the leading banking, accounting, and insolvency people, of course. And the insolvency people did this as kind of pro bono work for all the evil that they did in the world. And, you know, it was a pretty good thing to be involved with. And there's kind of a standard response that people have, you know, when there's a big surprise, when there's high threat and a short time frame to make decisions. And that is, you know, our span of attention tends to go down. We tend to become more inflexible, and we tend to think there's less time than what there is. And what's that precipitate? Well, it means that we start selectively filtering out information, that we lose sight of the order of importance of things. A friend of mine got a role as a CEO recently, and he said, Peter, what do I do now? And I said, well, you might think this sounds really silly and trite and very basic, but write stuff down and tick it off. And probably at this moment, you need to be doing that 3 times a day. And when people start relying on past experience, well, there is no past experience for this. There is no cognitive set. And if people start to lose their tolerance for ambiguity, then they're going to make bad decisions. Stereotyping, the number of people that have basically said to me, Peter, is it all right if we get stuck into the Chinese now? And it's like, well, no, you know, that guy could be your bank manager or your doctor. So, you know, respect for all. And, you know, have sensitivity to other people's perspectives when you're making these decisions. Because what will happen otherwise is that your search for information will go down, your evaluation of options will be compromised, and your perceived choice will be less than what it actually is. And I struck this the other day. There's a fellow that I always phone in any situation like this. He's the CEO of one of the most important New South Wales wine companies. And I said, well, you know, how are you going? Because like I say, you know, you never know. I thought he was going to say, well, we're wrapping up vintage, we've closed the cellar door, retail's strong for us at the moment, and we're just juggling things around, but we'll think we'll get through. But he didn't say that. He said, look, I think that we're going to have to go to a third of a winemaker, a third of an admin person. I'm going to have to sack myself, take kids out of private school, go home and hide under the doona. And sorry, that's the eider down for Kiwis. You know, I said, well, look, you know, I'm not sure that you're right. You're saying to me that there's a big run on 2-litre casks and only people of a certain socio-demographic are buying wine. I don't believe that. And sure enough, I phoned a friend of mine who owns a distribution company here in New South Wales, and he said, well, look, I've just been into McAtamney's, which, if you know the Australian market at all, you'll know is a very important wine shop in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And he said it looked like a swarm of locusts have been through there. So, you know, there has been a huge disruption and things are changing, but, you know, people are not going to stop drinking $20 and $30 bottles. They might stop drinking $60 champagne or, you know, icon wines, but, you know, I don't know about you, but I'd sooner eat Spam from a can than stop drinking half decent wine. Now, I've deliberately chosen this particular image because it really sums up, I guess, turnaround management in the US, old, hard, you know, confronting, and this is the message. But I think, you know, whenever you take a message from a textbook, you've got to reevaluate it in the current context. Yes, purchase order surgery, as we've said before, you know, look at all your upcoming expenditure. Freeze payables, well, gee, that might be a good idea when you're saving one business. And the Americans have got better provisions than we have in Australasia to deal with these things. And someone once said to me, there's only one check in the wine industry, Peter, and if anybody hangs on to it, then we're all in trouble. But, you know, get on and do that initial round of cost cutting and watch your cash flow. My wife is always frightening people by saying that I'm looking at our finances every month. I try not to frighten her in that I'm actually watching it every day. When I took over the small public listed company I was running in Marlborough all those years ago, that was the single best piece of advice that I got. You know, you need to be watching that cash flow all the time now. And look, get on with things. Don't get hung up on solving 100% of a problem. It's really important to focus on the 80% and the last 20% that might take 4 times longer. Well, sometimes we just have to move on. Sometimes it won't be perfect, like the start of this webinar this morning, but that's all right. Hopefully you'll forgive us. And in terms of what does the research say about turning around a small business? Well, efficiency tactics, as opposed to entrepreneurial tactics, generally win out. Things like improving employee productivity, reducing fixed assets, well, you know, there hasn't been a market for those for quite some time in the wine industry anyway, and stretching account payable, well, you know, be careful. But there's something that happens when people get desperate, and you might call it taking a big punt on the last race at Ellerslie, but I see it so often, you know, when I'm in that awful situation where the bank's got the gun to the client's head, and, you know, there's always a rich Chinaman that's going to come over the hill. It was terrible to watch this with a large family Australian wine company that went broke recently. You know, there was always, you know, going to be the miracle solution. First it was going to be digital, then it was going to be China, then it was going to be selling exclusive own labels to supermarkets. The first two are great ideas, but not in the singular silver bullet way that they were thinking about it. The last one, you want to stay as far away as possible, but always they were looking for a silver bullet solution rather than change fundamentally who and how we are or how they were. And, you know, I've heard this from some very powerful people in New Zealand when I'm talking about change. And when I hear words like, that's not who we are, well, you know, now's the time to be someone else. And if you're looking at the biggest single predictor of being able to save your small business, it's about getting your employees engaged in the business. And this is the most heavily researched area of the humanities. I mean, if people are motivated now, if they're not motivated now, then I guess God help us. And, you know, I've heard fantastic stories of, you know, people pitching in and helping out. And, you know, trust me, we can all do better. Nothing good ever comes of war. But if you think that, you know, from the late 19th century through to the mid last century, we invented planes, trains, automobiles, and sent a man to the moon. And so far this century, we've got Uber Eats, TikTok, and Pornhub. You know, we can go harder. And the real opportunity here is to actually change the whole culture of your business. If there's, and what a great time to be doing it. I mean, I spoke to the CEO of a New Zealand company just a few weeks ago, and I said to him, look, have you got that brand registered in the US? And he said, well, look, it's their name and we've used it for a long time and, you know, it'll be all right. And well, look, trust me, when you get that cease and desist letter from that large American spirits company or whomever, you might think differently about how you approach crisis management. Reactive, oh my God, I wish I'd done this 2 weeks ago. You know, I really do. But, you know, maybe New Zealand Winegrowers wouldn't have been in the position that they were to advance this. Maybe you wouldn't have been here to listen, but, you know, ideally it would have been 2 weeks ago. Ideally, it would be that green block at the end where we can say that crisis anticipation prevention is what we do. Now, the biggest opportunity of the lot is to take exactly this approach to innovation, to use this opportunity to make innovation what you do, to get out the digital number 8 wire and forward to and make real the legend of Kiwi ingenuity. I mean, there are people in Hawke's Bay, for example, making wine for an Australian audience that hasn't existed for 10 years. There is people in Marlborough who've never bothered to understand their success, let alone all the evolution that's happened in the market in the 20 years since that started. This is the opportunity to make that change. And everybody needs not 1, but 3 plans, because I'm always hearing people debating which one of these to focus on. You must do both, and you must do them now. How are we going to deal with this emergency? How are we going to stabilize things? And how are we going to return to growth? Because if you do things in the emergency phase without thought for the return to growth phase, you might make things worse than they would be otherwise. You know, the cure might be worse than the problem. And we're seeing these emerging all over the place. This is the governor of Utah. This is them setting out, you know, I guess a fairly realistic time frame for how they want to go from that urgent phase to stabilization to recovery. And McKinsey talk about bounded optimism. In other words, putting realistic limits on things. The Donald wanted this to be done by Easter, but I don't think the Easter Bunny told Corona, or if he did, she wasn't listening. And, you know, Jacinda Ardern is proving to be the model globally. There's an article floating around, you might have seen it, about how what she's doing is modeled on a particular article that appeared in the Harvard Business Review. Now, maybe Jacinda read that article, or maybe she just figured it out for herself. But there is a reason for her 80% popularity, and that is that when you convey a message in a way that says, look, this is where we are, this is what we all need to do together, and then shows empathy for the fact that, you know, it's going to be hard for people, then you can genuinely get people's support, as opposed to, say, for example, Boris Johnson, who did what Tories do best, told everybody that they better get into their homes, otherwise the police would be beating them back in there. Certainly they got a result, but maybe they could have gone about it a little more sensitively. And if you're going to do surgery, then do it in one step. You know, it's like pulling a fish hook out of your finger or out of somebody else's, count to 5 and pull on 1. And this is your opportunity to clean a few things up at your place. You know, if there were parts of your business that wasn't working, and you know, might be saying, well, you're talking about businesses, Peter, we're a small business. I've seen small businesses with 14 different businesses per se, you know, that could all have their own P&L. So it's time to think about, well, you know, is this business really a business we should be in? Do we need all those products? Do we need to be in all those markets? And for the larger businesses that are listening in, then this is a time to be having a chat. The supermarkets are booming right now, and they're not promoting, and they're not giving you back your money. Please don't call these guys foodies or whatever. They are not your chums. They are the people that had you on your knees prior to this. It's time to go in en masse and say, look, you know, we need to talk. If you want us to be around after this, you need to look after us. And, you know, and I guess if that conversation doesn't go anywhere, well, then there's always the threat that, you know, you guys will expose their practices. I mean, and they need an inquiry, but it would be far smarter of these major operators to show some goodwill to the industry now than it would be for a story about what they're actually doing to come out. For smaller businesses, and well, for every business, why is wine the absolute perfect thing for right now? Well, you know, people need a distraction. They need socialization, and the best operators I'm seeing are socializing with people that are staying at home, and they're doing it highly effectively through virtual tastings and social media. But now's your opportunity, when you've got people's focus, to really get them familiar with your brand. Now's the opportunity for people that wanted to learn something about wine to finally learn something. Now's the time to talk about, you know, how to have fun with wine and food. And I was asked the question, what would Jordan do? Now, Jordan Vineyards in Sonoma, not to be confused with Jordan, South Africa, who have the same type font and Gangnam Style Christmas videos, I rate as the single best wine marketers on earth. Why? Because, you know, they make a Chardonnay at $38 and a Cabernet at 65, and they sell 150,000 cases. So there's a business who've got the resources and the time to really get their marketing right. And I got an email the other day, this time from John Jordan. It's a bit jovial, it's Gary Jordan, but more serious, it's John, and he's outlined 5 things that they're doing. I think if any winery tuning in here could do one of these, they'd be well served. They've made a list of all the great places across the country that are doing amazing wine and food stuff. And look, you know, you would have seen it, I've seen it in my neighborhood. It's actually much more difficult for the average restaurant to put together, you know, the average day at a restaurant than it is to put together a nice wine and food package. So they're being very creative and coming up with wonderful stuff. They've got winter wine fridge for your date night at home, you know, seen as a photo. They've got a list of all the great TV shows and what to eat. They've got kitchen pantry raid ideas for matching their Cabernet, and you know, bloopers from their videos. And their videos, I think, provide a great example of understanding that you need to send people content that they need. I mean, they won an award a few years back for the best video produced by the wine industry. It was just some Mexican workers picking grapes under lights to music. got a lot of views, but how to make macaroons, 3 times as many views. And this is what the wine industry is not doing that I've been saying it should be doing for years. How about sending people a decent glass with a bottle of your wine and running a session on what a difference that makes? Or how about telling them to get their decanters out of the cupboard, or if they haven't got one, a jug, pour that out and let it breathe for an hour and see what difference that makes. I mean, there are 100 ways to engage with your audience. And right now people will do almost anything for wine. This fellow was on that cruise ship, and he organised with Naked Wines to send him a bottle of wine via drone. And of course, everybody went completely crazy and said, how irresponsible, how reckless, how dare he do this at this time? And the Coast Guard went mad flying an aircraft through their space and so forth. But just look at his face, and it really tells the story, I think. And I love this. This is the Rockefeller Foundation. Their mission since 1913 was to improve the welfare of humanity around the world. And, it couldn't be clearer that the main reason why your customers leave you is that they think you don't care about them. And this sort of speaks to the same sort of theme. I'm always using this in our workshops. It's a very old book now, you can tell by that haircut, but Jan Carlson that discovered if you're delivering a service, as we all are, when we're tasting wine with people, then it's not about who's got the best on-time arrivals and who's got the newest aircraft, but it's about the 6 times when, someone from your business interacts with someone. And don't underestimate the goodwill that people will have for you. One complaint I'm having is that, people are dropping club subscriptions like there's no tomorrow. But if you haven't done it already, make sure you give people the opportunity to suspend any shipments or club shipments. This is Commerce 7, who are operational in New Zealand. It was started by the same guy that was MD of Wine Direct, or Bin 65 before that. They found that 93% of people would put their club membership on hold, while this is happening, or at any time. And now's the time to be building a database, everyone. So what I'd do straight after this, I'd get everybody in your business to export their inbox, because you can export your inbox out of Outlook just like you can your contacts. Go through that list of people in that Excel file or CSV file and see who might be a prospect. Go through all your email subscribers on your website, pull out all your data. If you're using a POS that enables you to enter customer data, clean up all the pads from the tasting rooms, get everything in there. And never forget that no one has more reason to ingratiate themselves to you than your suppliers. And now's a great time to be running competitions to get more people involved. But the art of doing this and making this work is all about personalization. And I think the people that understood this first and best were Two Hands in the Barossa. They started out by sending emails that said, hi, we've got wine, and they'd sell 1 or 2 cases. And I'm sure you've had that experience. But once they moved to, hi, Sally Mark, John, thank you for joining us for our video tasting the other evening. We're glad that you enjoyed our Chardonnay Cabernet Syrah. They went from selling not 20 or 30% more wine, but 50 times as much. So they went to selling 100 cases or $40,000 worth of wine with each mail out. And how you set this thing up, how you set your event up, I'm anticipating that you are going to set events up, is all about, what we talk in our workshops, theatre management. I mean, you can significantly influence how people behave by how you set your theatre up. And what do we mean by that? What are we talking about in terms of that concept? An old salesman once said to me, you've got to tell people about something 3 times, and if they say no after that, they're just bad-mannered. So what I would do is I would put the whole concept for that tasting in a PDF. I would tell people what we're going to be tasting, how much it's going to cost, very important, and give them some introductory information, don't give it all away, about what you're doing and what you'll be tasting. And put your club offer down in that bottom right-hand corner right at the outset. Then email that thing again before you actually do that tasting. And then by the time you're actually doing the tasting with them, then they'll be well advanced on that journey to actually buying what it is that you're selling, be it a vertical pack. You might want to send, 2, 3, 4 bottles as a vintage, or you might want to do that tasting where we're checking, whether decanters work or not, or we might, be wanting to send them something in relation to a new release you're about to put out. Great time to get new products going. And then take your team. I hate 3 words where one will do, but it's a fairly simple idea. Sit down and work out right now who's going to say what to whom, using what media, and how often. In the US, they've actually got the whole tasting room team doing tastings for people from home. They're sending out, 2, 3, 4 bottles and doing the tasting with people online. For very expensive, high-end places, they're sending a core of them along with it. And, so that is still happening for some of these wineries. Others that have got new brands are doing things on Instagram Live. You can do a countdown on Instagram. They tend to have, very high levels of followers, maybe not so much immediate sales. If you've got any sort of an established brand, I would use that 1, 2, 3 message. Send them an email saying that something is coming. Send that information again with the package, and then use that to engage with when you're selling. And there's never been a more important time for social media. I mean, social media is there to connect people, but you don't need, to take on a new role here. You don't need to be the clown for everyone. We've got entertainment already, fantastic entertainment in the likes of Sam Neill, who are keeping people's spirits up on both sides of the Tasman. I would just keep running your social narrative. And here's an example of a brilliant post I saw the other day, I think. It's a friend of mine, Drew Reski, and he's basically staring down the barrel at you saying, look, here comes your grapes from this harvest. I'm taking these off right now, and I'm going to go and make these into wine for you now. And in just 2 paragraphs, he's basically put up his vintage report. So instead of making some incredibly tedious, boring, piece of website content and then, distributing that out through social media, he's done that in reverse. And he's a person that's always done this. I remember he used to have this sort of stuff streaming down the front of his front page on his website. And he said, Peter, is that all right? And I said, absolutely, because what he'd done is that he'd kind of invented Facebook before Facebook was Facebook, if you get what I'm saying. So his thought process is always, okay, well, look, where are people's eyeballs going to be? What is the most impact I can have? How many things can I do, in one go and make it all tie together? And you can see, from the engagements down the bottom, 153 and 12 comments and all the rest of it, how well this is working for him right now. And people that have never done it before are frightened to communicate with people. But I always say there's no need to ever communicate with anybody ever unless you've got a legitimate reason to do it. But if you've got some sort of special release coming up, or some sort of online event, or you're about to make a club shipment, tell them that it's coming, talk to them as it's arriving, and then most importantly, ask that question afterwards. Now, people are always saying, look, should we want another telephone call? I can tell you from where I'm sitting that my phone is dead. And normally I'd be getting 6 or 7 calls a day from spammers, from charities, from, all sorts of people that I don't want to get phone calls for. You've got to remember that wine is kind of a happy place for people, and people, should be pleased to get that call. And if you've got more calls than you can handle, then Woolworths, under their Langton's banner, and Venomofu, 2 businesses that are operational in New Zealand, who'd be happy to help out. And don't ever forget this, the most powerful leverage that you've got in all this is free freight. I know that freight's cheaper in New Zealand, relatively speaking, than in most countries around the world, but free freight's kind of like petrol vouchers. People will do almost anything to get it. So, in the US, for example, almost 1/3 of people would join a club or a loyalty program just to get free freight. Now, now's the time to very quickly get on and fix up that website. you know. And one of the things that slows things down the most in New Zealand is putting this age verification widget on the front. You've got to do it, but you know, do look at some big brands and do look at what they're doing and look at the best of them and see how they're getting through that and around that quickly. Taylors have a huge business in New Zealand. Taylors, the Australian wine company, not the Portuguese pork company, and it's good to have a look at and see what they're doing. You know, if your site's not mobile responsive, then it probably should be. Check all your links. If somebody's sitting at home doing nothing, get them to go through everything. Go through the email signatures that you send out. Go through everything that links back to your site and make sure everything works. Make sure that you're set up so that there's plenty of what do you want me to do, i.e. buy wine, you know, towards the front of your site. Move to one-click shopping. I was talking about that as a dream for years because, you know, of how good Amazon's setup is, but now it's a simple widget that any of you can install. But do this. Go to a site called Website Grader. There's different versions of this. This is HubSpot's, and just put your URL, that is your website address, in, and it will give you a free health check. And better than that, it'll tell you exactly what to do to fix up your site. And then go to your developer and say to them, look, this is what I want done. And it should only be a couple of $100 to fix up, or a few hours time to fix up this stuff. And if you haven't got one-click checkout, then get on and get that done. Because again, using Core7 research, more than half of sales online are using this. It's nice that Google Forms will fill out a lot of this stuff, but you know, better if people can simply be remembered and at a push of a button make their next purchase. And if you haven't got it already, and very few people have, get a personalization block. Now, a personalization block just means that when somebody goes onto your shop, it knows who you are and what you've been interested in and what you've bought. Now, these are 14 times as effective as having stuff that's just on your product list page. And what I mean by product list page, well, you know how so many websites have got wine, and then they've got a list of all your products, and then you have to go through to the details page, and then there's buy wine and so forth. Make sure that there is a button to buy wine as soon as people get anywhere near any pictures or information about your wine, because on that first page, that product list page, there are twice as much sales made as in that product detail page. And think very carefully about what you show to people first. I was talking to a client the other day. He's out of a big company. He's working for a small one now. And he'd worked out that the $180 box, the 6 bottles for $180, was absolutely optimal for them, because that optimized people's expenditure and it optimized return for the business. So do that rather than putting your $16 rosé first, because that is important. What comes first is important. Get onto search engine optimization, SEO. New Zealand winery websites are pretty bad at this generally. And use everything that Google has. Google has had it as their mantra, don't be evil. That was scrubbed off their website recently to much uproar. If you don't have a Google Merchant account, you don't know what that is, find out. It'll take you 10 minutes, open one anyway. Google will advance you up the search rankings. If you've never done any search engine marketing before, open a Google AdWords account, find out how that works. Get it to limit itself to, I don't know, $20 or $30 a month to start with. It'll try and encourage you to spend more, but that will also help. If you're a larger business, go to Google Manufacturing, really important. Own your brand, and that way, as online retailers get more aggressive, as they will, Woolworths Australia is coming, then you'll have a better chance of being seen first before they take your customers. And video helps, but be very careful about how you load it. Social media link backs are really important too, but nothing beats posting original content on your website. So what I was saying earlier about what my client did with that Facebook post that was better than having a blog, put that blog post in anyway, because that is really important to Google. And if you are doing a bit of search engine marketing, then a big tip, SEMrush is a very good tool there. And always look at what the big brands and the good brands and the brands you like are doing. I mean, this to me is kind of a perfect search page. This is Jordan Vineyards, and you'll have a look at this afterwards, but you'll see the incredible economy of words that they've used here, so that when Google is drying their words up, as it were, they've already said exactly what they want to say. And when you see things like menu, that's not taking you through to menu on their website. It's taking you through to all the different things that they have available for you to do. So make sure that on every one of your platforms, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on your Google landing page or your search page, put in a button, book an experience at home, or book a tasting at home, or something similar to that, because there's the opportunity to do those on all your various feeds. But most importantly, get out and do something now. I get so frustrated talking to people when they say, look, we're not going to do anything until everything's perfect. And it's like, well, now you've got license to get out there and maybe make a few mistakes like we did when we were kicking off this morning with our open mics for everyone to listen to us bumbling and fumbling around. Then people will forgive you for that. And here's one example here, Zonte's Footstep. They're from McLaren Vale, and a very interesting brand to go and have a look at, all their wine concepts and so forth. They'll say, we'll admit that we don't understand how toilet paper became such a hot commodity. However, we've been stockpiling wine. We've been doing that for years. Now, maybe that's a private joke that they should have kept amongst themselves, but that's, and I hope their accountant isn't watching this later today when we broadcast to Australia, but, that's the point of showing you this. If you make a few mistakes like this, you're not going to be crucified. And here's the Molly Duker. Molly Duker is Australian slang for left-handed. I think it was New Zealand slang at one stage, many, many years ago. They are one of the best marketers out of Australia in North America. They're pretty much the only brand you can find consistently in retail other than Yellowtail now. And what I think is striking about this is, the simplicity of the language and the nature of the language. They're saying, things have been very strange for us. They're not saying good, they're not saying bad. I was at the post office the other morning and a woman comes in and says, oh, the world's gone crazy. And the woman behind the counter says, I know. Like, you're not the 5,000th person that said that today. They're just saying, right, okay, we'll bring our tasting to you. Luke, my son, and I, Sarah, will do this tasting, and it's going to be great. And I remember talking to Luke's grandmother, making me feel old, and she said, oh, you wouldn't think that anybody would be interested in talking to me, but when we had that live hookup with our importers in the US, you'll be amazed at how many people gather around the computer and wave and say hello and all the rest of it. So even in the best of times, people want that. Now, I think the most important message today, and excuse me, Rod, if you're watching, borrowing some of your stuff, but look, there will never be a more important moment than right now as far as that unboxing moment goes. I mean, what you can put in there in terms of wine, food, and other things that you might send to people in this moment, put tickets in there, real paper tickets to virtual events or events that you've got coming up down the line. When I used to get a box from the Molly Duker, there'd be a t-shirt and a cap and a book on how to do the Molly Duker shake, to shake all the nitrogen out of their wine that they used to preserve it. I mean, by the time you'd finished, you felt like you were 7 years old again. So think about that. I mean, I don't think you'll ever have a better opportunity to win the hearts and minds of your customers than right now. Go and do something right now and send something to people that are sat at home. Let them know that you care about them. Well, look, that's it. So Charlotte, if you want to fire some questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you very, very much, Peter. That was incredible how you managed to get that amount of content across in 45 minutes. I didn't believe you could do it. You can. Yeah, topic.
I've had some practice.
yeah, for me, key takeouts of, don't try and solve 100% of your problem. Do 80%, because that remaining 20% can take time that you don't have. Time is now. And now is the time to be someone else. That's a really interesting point you've made there. Why wine is perfect for now. Absolutely, can attest to that in my own household. The naked wine delivery on a cruise ship, I did not know of that. That'll be interesting to see as a result of this call, if we have an increase in drone delivered New Zealand wine. But yeah, using the time valuably now to build databases, clean them up, look at your website, the website grader, the SEO, one-click checkout, just asking all those questions, really, really important. So I'm going to start looking for questions now. Please don't be shy. I don't see anything here in the chat group. But yeah, moving on from this, everyone, we're going to be looking at further content to follow on from Peter's talk, insights on our major markets, research trends, looking at how to optimize social media and digital. That's all part of it.
Peter, and one thing I should very quickly throw in before we lose anybody, because I see we've still got 155 people online, is that I am accredited provider to the Regional Business Partners Network. So if you're talking to them and you're able to get a voucher, then I can provide one-on-one help. I'm not sure whether it's completely free of charge or not, but if you've seen the coronavirus package that New Zealand has, I am a registered provider for that. If anybody wants to get in touch directly and talk to your regional business partner about that.
Absolutely. And yeah, on our COVID-19 section of our website, we have some links there on where to seek further support. So yes, there is a link there to the Regional Business Partner Network, links to NZTE. A coordinated New Zealand Inc. approach is what we're all aiming for here in the recovery to COVID-19. I think everyone's been very shy here. I'm not sure if it's the technology of GoToMeeting that people aren't sure on where to ask questions, but you just go, there's a little control panel, and you can just put a question there in the question icon.
Yeah, maybe a bit of, I don't know if this is a Kiwi expression as well, but maybe a bit of throw me a Dorothy Dixer, maybe just throw me a question that I can answer, because I think, expecting people to multitask and write questions at the same time they're listening, it's a hard thing to, learn on the fly sort of thing. So if you've got a question, one thing I'll just add quickly.
I do have a question. A question. Sure. How does Peter's suggestion regarding harvest pick on Facebook fit with our New Zealand Winegrowers guidelines on the dark harvest on social? So yeah, I hadn't briefed you on that, Peter, but over here in New Zealand, there has been a bit of negative backlash about the wine industry continuing as an essential business. So we are just in this time of lockdown, just trying to keep our heads down, get our harvest in, and not put that type of comms here. But that's a different thing. I
don't know. I'd be going harder. I'd be going the other way. I would be taking it up to them and say, look, at the moment, bottle shops in New Zealand are considered non-essential. And the last thing in the world you want to be doing is throwing more power to the supermarkets. We've got to make sure that those guys are there on the other side, because they're an essential part of making sure that the independent wine food offer is there after this crisis. So I'll be using that as a sort of common political tactic, rather than being on the back foot and just trying to be defensive, trying to keep them occupied with a positive reason to do something for the wine industry. depending on, who you're talking to and what their politics are and what they'll listen to, of course.
Yes. One question here is that very much today's presentation was about B2C comms, and how could we expand this to B2B?
Well, very good point. And this last slide is quite pertinent because Rod just happens to be the representative of Naked Wines in New Zealand. And he would know that Naked Wines in the UK is going absolutely berserk. So the first thing to be doing is talking again to anybody that you've dealt with in the past who's in that business. A good friend of mine is CEO of Grays Online, which in normal circumstances you'd hope not to be talking to. He sort of describes himself as, or themselves as the cockroaches of the wine industry. But he's saying right now, they're inundated both with sales that they're making and with people coming to them with wine to sell. But yeah, I mean, go to all your online people all the way around the world and check in with them and make sure that they've got stock and make sure that you're getting promoted and make sure that you're as close to the front of the queue as possible. And also watch out for initiatives that your importers are involved with. Bibendum, for example, have developed an app to help the on-premise sell wine direct to customer. So a lot of the major importers around the world, if you're lucky enough to be with one of them in the country that you're trying to sell wine in, are developing their own initiatives to help the on-trade and retailers and so forth all expand their direct customer efforts. So there's good efforts everywhere, but I think for any business that's sort of 50,000 cases and up, the single most important thing to be doing is making sure that the pipeline's working. I mean, I can't tell you how awful it was to have to do this webinar for South Africa last night and listen to how they've been stopped from moving wine at all. They can't even take samples in to get tested. They can't move their wine off the docks. So, they're in a very much disadvantaged situation, I guess, as a competitor to New Zealand, than what New Zealand is. So, whilst, some other countries are dealing with these issues, and clearly there's an opportunity for New Zealand to continue driving forward.
Just one point that you made about cleaning up your database and making sure everyone in your database is there and exporting to your inbox. Our advocacy team.
Exporting. Sorry, so let's be clear. It's very, very important because it's a very strange idea. There is basically a process you can set up to export your inbox out into a CSV file, and then to go through to add that onto your database. Use the remove duplicates function and have a good hard look at who's left and to see who is a logical candidate to be sent a communication.
Yes, just our legal team just raised the point that it could be in breach of New Zealand law prohibiting unsolicited electronic communications. So yeah, you might just have to have some sort of permission that you are able to contact those people.
Yeah, and that's why that phone call is so important. That is the easiest phone call you'll ever make in your life. Hi, did you get that wine? Oh, thanks for asking. That's never certain. So great that you're asking. Did you enjoy that wine? Well, of course they did. It's wine. Would you like some more? Well, why not? Would you mind if we contacted you from time to time when we've got something that you might be interested in? So, thereby ticking off all the boxes on the privacy legislation. So, and that's what you might have to do with that initial email. Hi, and the reason I'm saying the inbox is these will be people that you're already very familiar with. And then you might have to ask that same question. Would you mind if we sent you a communication from time to time in relation to, buying some wine? But almost all the wineries that I'm dealing with are not asking that question. They're just getting on and firing emails at me. But I'd have to say that there are not that many of them doing it. In terms of all my winery contacts from around the world, very few of them are actually sending emails that I'm getting. And I do buy wine, but please don't anybody out there look to subscribe to your database this morning. But there are those people all around us, and you know, provided that you're careful and thoughtful, then there is a way to work around that legislation, or work with that legislation, I should say.
Yeah. Just one comment here about the unboxing element that you raised at the end.
Yeah.
The question was, have you seen any innovative ways of managing the handling? i.e. a little
Yes,
hand
I have
sanitizer
some very useful information. If you haven't seen this already, they've actually tested how long coronavirus will live on cardboard, and it's not more than 12 hours. So when anybody's delivering anything today, I don't know whether you've had deliveries while you've been at home, you know, there's a whole protocol that any decent business will run through with you when they're talking through how it's going to happen. And this is another excuse to engage with customers when they're talking about how the person, I mean, we've had all sorts of people in and out of the place, but it's all, you know, been very thoroughly managed. And then you could say to people at the end, well, if you're still not happy, just leave the thing on your porch overnight, and that should take care of that in terms of safe handling of the product.
Great. And Sharon Ma from the Hunting Lodge has just raised a point here that they're finding that the consumers are responding really well to love local and 48-hour free delivery. So
yeah.
I think,
well, that's one thing. I mean, you know, New Zealand's one of the few countries on earth, you know, who, you know, can get delivery times down to what we'd all dreamed that they would be. I mean, China obviously leads the world in that regard, but I remember 10 years ago, Get One could get wine to anyone in the lower North Island same day if they ordered before 10 o'clock. So that possibility in New Zealand has been around for quite a long time, so we've got to take advantage of that. Yeah, I mean, supporting people around you. You know, I personally think the world's going to look very different after this. Everybody's saying that, but I think that, you know, Australia and New Zealand and North Asian countries have singled themselves out in the world in terms of how they've responded, and that we're in a fantastic position going forward because their major trading partners, China, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., have all adopted protocols fairly similar to our own that will get out of it first and lightest. And you know, that going forward will have a big advantage over the US, for example, who are going to have massive questions around their health system and why they didn't do something about it until now. Or they're not doing it now, but they're going to have to,
Yeah. Well, that's quite a nice segue here into a question about what changes are we going to see in how people purchase wine when life returns back to normal? Do you think that people are going to just have got used to buying online, and so the future of the wine store and that personal experience may change?
I think they are, and I also think that can be part of your negotiation, you know, with the supermarkets. You know, we've you know, as we're getting out of this, you know, to sit down and as part of the conversation with the supermarket, say, hey, look, you know, we've had this unique opportunity to build these very strong bonds with our customers through all this, and you know, so we really need to work together now, and we're not as reliant on you as what we used to be, being the underlying message. Look, I might have to go fairly soon because I've got to do this all again.
Yeah, you're amazing. Well, final question. A question from Josh Scott saying that a lot of New Zealand wineries learned much from the 2008 GFC and oversupply. Are there lessons from this period that we do not want to repeat in this period?
Yeah, really, really important ones, and good question. First of all, the biggest trap that people got suckered into, and you know, I spoke about this at Brigato maybe 10 years ago, was the second label trap, and everybody in Central Otago knows that one. That the second label trap is one to be avoided. But if you're an entirely a high-end brand, then having some accessible wine now can be a good strategy, so long as it's highly differentiated from everything else that you do. So long as your extraction out of that is very well planned and thought through, that you're not building up ongoing supply to that idea. Michael Ersick at Independent Beverages or Independent Distillers, really was the example there. I mean, he built a business that Lion bought for over $1 billion New Zealand dollars. Based on his ability to scale up and scale down. So if you want to do that, then that can be good. But do not lose faith in luxury wine, because during the GFC, there are a lot of people coming out in the US saying, oh, we're never going to see luxury wine again. And, they could not have been more wrong, because, of course, the moment the economy started to pick up at all, and even during the depth of the Depression, premium wine in the US just went absolutely through the roof. So that'd be the two messages. Don't lose faith in your high-end stuff. Don't stop planning for a recovery. Whatever you do, don't stop making that stuff. Don't make too much stuff. There's a very good article, if you want to look it up, from the CEO of Banfi Wines in Italy, talking about how they're making sure that they've not got too much supply coming on and all the things they're doing. And if you are going to do some sort of second label, be very bloody careful, is all I can say. Do not run that thing down the same distribution channel as your main label, because that will wreck your business, and it'll take you 5 or 6 years to dig yourself out from that. Over half the consulting assignments I had during the first 5 years of doing this were about exactly that.
Yeah. Got time for one more question, or?
I think so. Actually, I think I was panicking a bit. It's only 11:30 that I'm on, so I should be okay.
Just a quick one here. So for a company who sells purely to the trade, what is Peter's thoughts about opening up to direct public sales and competing with traditional online retail customers?
Yeah, we've just got to do it. Everybody is. You let that bother you, and then you miss out horribly. I've got 2 clients, or had 2 clients. One of them's been bought by another company now in the Barossa. And one said, well, okay, we own a distribution company, and we've got to be really careful, and we're really conservative, and we're really old-fashioned, we're not going to do it. And they had 500 grand in direct revenue. Another client of mine, and I can say this because they've since been acquired, Grant Burge, says, well, screw them, I'm doing it anyway. And he had 5 million in direct revenue, same size business. So, every retailer knows that this is happening. New Zealand's been very, very slow in coming on board. Australia and South Africa are way ahead of New Zealand generally. Now's the opportunity to put the foot on the gas and to catch up and run past the likes of Australia and New Zealand where all this is concerned. Australia and South Africa, I should say. Yeah,
brilliant, great, thank you. And there has been a question, can we continue to ask questions after this webinar? Yes,
yeah, please. If people want to email me a question, that's absolutely fine. If people want to set up an hour of consulting or whatever through your regional business partner, of course, that's what I want. I've got to work as well, so,
Absolutely, and I was about to say that there are some that will be specific New Zealand wine growers questions, so please direct those to nzmarketing@nzwine.com. That was in your registration for the webinar today. Yeah, because we've got some China specific questions here. I'm not sure if you want to ask a China specific one, answer one, Peter, but beyond the lockdown period, how do you see China fundamentally changing their wine consumption habits and their speed of recovery? That's crystal ball stuff, right?
Yeah, well, look, I think China already was going exactly the way that suits what we're doing now. My brother is a school teacher in China, and he said, look, anytime before, during, and after the lockdown, I could have food outside my door in 19 minutes. So they're just going to go hard and faster with that. I don't think there's any fear about that. So, the challenge is not the virus. The challenge is to actually make wine something that is sustainable as an idea in China. And I think that the way that the Chinese drink, particularly in the business setting, is not sustainable, in that ultimately that'll be caught up on, and ultimately, you know, the Chinese government will have something to say about people's health. I mean, they've had plenty to say about them trying to kill themselves with Beiju, but, you know, that'll be wine shortly as well. So, you know, the survival of wine in China as an idea, I think, is about normalizing it as behavior, is about, you know, being a part of everyday consumption in restaurants rather than celebratory or business or special occasion consumption, as it is now mainly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, yeah, I spent nearly 6 years living in China, and I saw it in the space of time I was living there. Very fast changes in wine consumption, especially the young, very interested in that area. But
Yep.
I think we'll draw it to a close. Peter, thank you so much for your generous expertise that you've shared here with us. And as you said, Peter, through the Regional Business Partner Network, will continue to be available to us all. There is a short survey after this. I'd love to hear further topics that you'd like us to cover, and it's going to be a key focus of ours during this lockdown period. So thank you very, very much for your attention all, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.